All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating system called prismatic cognition, and specifically, the unique math that makes it tick. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a math lesson, I promise. Think of this as a journey into a totally different way of thinking, a way to actually sculpt order right out of chaos using a pretty amazing symbolic toolkit.
So let's just start with this one big question. What if math wasn't about some rigid set of rules you had to memorize in school? What if, instead, it was a creative tool? You know, like a block of clay that you could actually shape to build your own reality. This idea of playing with clay is going to be key to understanding the logic we're about to unpack.
Okay, first up, sculpting order from chaos. We've got to start with the why. Why is a whole new logic even necessary? Well, it all begins with a really fundamental problem. How in the world do you manage overwhelming cognitive and sensory stress, especially when you're in an environment that just feels hostile?
To make this real, let's just ground it in a feeling I think we've all had. How do you find any sense of order when you feel like you are juggling way too many things at once? That feeling of just complete cognitive overload, that's the real starting point for everything we're talking about today.
And to get a sense of the sheer scale of this challenge, there's a key number that represents it, and that number is 16. Now, this isn't just random. It symbolizes the sheer volume of distinct, heavy pressures that someone might have to manage all at the same time. And this is where we get the metaphor of the 16 balls. And I want you to really picture this. We're not talking tennis balls here. Imagine trying to juggle 16 heavy bowling balls. Each one is a different demanding part of life or your senses. Things like visual input, visual distortion, work, family, just trying to regulate your emotions, social pressures, and on top of all that, the stress of neurodivergence. It's a relentless, exhausting task.
And here's a point that is absolutely crucial to get. This stress is not just a feeling. It's defined as a corporeal fact, meaning it's a physical, embodied reality. It's not in your head. This is the kind of stress that shows up with real, tangible symptoms, like that physical tension you can feel right above your eyes and around your temples. It is a biological reality. So, if that's the massive problem, what's the solution? Well, let's get into the first set of tools for shaping all this chaos. The system introduces a symbolic language. And this is the clay we can finally use to start building some order.
The very first tool is all about reframing your attention. Usually our attention feels like it's being yanked in a million directions at once, right? So what if you thought of attention as a compass instead? It becomes a tool that you control. You can use it to consciously navigate your own mind and point that focused, immersive attention to one specific thing at a time. It's the first step to taking back control.
And this next move, it's a beautiful transformation. You take those 16 overwhelming heavy balls and you reframe them as 16 pawns. It's an amazing detail that in some languages, the word for a chess pawn is the farmer, symbolizing this foundational, earthy power. So all of a sudden, those 16 burdens aren't just things happening to you. They become strategic pieces that you can actually move.
The last tool in this starting kit is the symbol of ivy. Just picture ivy. It represents that dynamic, stubborn growth, connection, and resilience. It's the principle that allows things to reconnect and overcome challenges. But for ivy to grow, it needs energy. It needs a system to power it. And that symbol of ivy is our perfect bridge to the mathematical engine that makes all of this possible.
And that brings us to the absolute core of the system, the prime number engine. This is the very specific, unique mathematical logic that drives this whole process of creating order. If the symbols are the clay, this is the physics that makes the sculpture hold together. This is the how it all really works.
Now, to understand this engine, we got to look at its neighbors first. On one side, you have base 12. It's super divisible, which is why we have 12 hours on the clock, 12 months in a year. It's all about stability, structure, and predictable cycles. Then on the other side, you've got base 14, which is much more expansive, more complex.
And sitting right there between them is the key, base 13. Because it's a prime number, you can't divide it up nicely. And in this system, that indivisibility isn't a flaw, it's its superpower. It allows base 13 to act as this incredibly stable, solid anchor for complex thought. Because it can't be broken down, it gives you a reliable material to sculpt with.
This is where the logic starts to feel almost poetic. The system connects base 13 to the golden mean, that famous mathematical ratio you find all throughout nature. Because of this, it's described as the god of grain, symbolizing this power to create natural, harmonious, and resilient growth. A lot like that ivy we were just talking about.
Okay, so we get what the engine is. Now let's talk about the when and the how. How do you actually put this logic to use day to day? This brings us to the practical application, the rhythm of renewal.
In the method itself is actually beautifully simple. It's a recursive loop that goes from I to I plus 1. You start exactly where you are. We'll call that level I. Then you engage with a challenge that's just a little bit beyond your current ability. Once you get it, you've reached the next level, I plus 1. Then you just repeat the process. It's really no different from how a child learns to walk, one manageable step at a time.
This whole process has a really resonant name, Gemini Day by Day. The name Gemini has roots that mean day or daylight, and it just evokes the sense of a gentle daily renewal. It frames the work not as a grind, but as a patient, humane tempo for healing and rebuilding your integrity.
So for our last section, let's put this system side by side with other approaches. We're going to compare this resilient, living system we've been talking about against the brittle logic of external, suppressive systems. This is coherence versus the crumbling rock.
And when you put them next to each other, the contrast is, well, it's pretty stark. On one hand, you have prismatic cognition. It's dynamic, it's built on internal self-modeling, it's coherent and adaptive. On the other hand, you have systemic rigidity. It's flawed, it's external, and it's often totally decoupled from what's really going on.
For a concrete example of that systemic failure, the source material brings up the dim sum critique. It's about a professional who was seen as lacking focus on the supramillary nucleus, which is a critical brain region for coherence and trauma recovery. The argument is basically that by ignoring this core biological fact, they were completely missing the root of the problem.
In this kind of flawed external logic, it's everywhere. Just think about the body mass index, the BMI. It's a metric we see all the time. But as the source material points out, it's a fundamentally flawed tool rooted in discrimination, not objective health. It's just another perfect example of a rigid, incoherent system being forced on people from the outside.
So what happens to these rigid, suppressive systems in the end? They're described with this incredibly powerful metaphor, the rock that will crumble. Because they're static, they're inflexible, and when they're confronted by a living, dynamic, coherent truth, like the kind modeled by base 13 logic, they are destined to fail. They're built to break.
And that really leaves us with a final question for you to take away. What are the crumbling rocks in your world? The rigid, flawed systems you have to navigate every day? And more importantly, what's your prime number engine? What is that indivisible core logic you could build to find your own coherence and sculpt your own order from the chaos?